I don't know how they did it. All I know is they did it. I don't think anybody knows how they did it, how they lifted those stones, how they brought them up to that level. I think we're looking, again, at a lost technology.
For decades, Graham Hancock has argued that Egypt's pyramids are not what history books say. To him, they are the fingerprints of a forgotten civilization, mapped to the stars and built with tools beyond the copper chisels of the Fourth Dynasty.
My approach to the question was, where are the quarries? What kind of a ramp can you get from the quarry to the pyramid in a functional slope?
But what happens when you hold those claims against the stones themselves? Join us as we test Hancock's case with real evidence, the kind you can pull up within 48 hours. Graham Hancock's pyramid claims. Did the Egyptians of the Fourth Dynasty truly build the pyramids of Giza, or do these monuments point to something far older? That question hangs over the desert like a riddle where history, astronomy, and mystery all collide. For decades, one striking theory has kept the debate alive. What if the three Great Pyramids are not only tombs, but a star map carved into the earth itself? That idea, first put forward by Robert Bauval and later amplified by Graham Hancock, is known as the Orion correlation theory. Its appeal is simple yet powerful. Look up at the sky, look down at the plateau, and the match seems undeniable. The story starts in the early 1980s, when Bauval was out in the Arabian desert with friends. One night, while watching Orion rise, a friend pointed out something subtle. The three stars that make up Orion's belt aren't perfectly straight. One of them is nudged just a little off the line. Bauval connected that small offset to something familiar, the layout of the three pyramids on the Giza Plateau. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, the Pyramid of Khafra, and the smaller Pyramid of Menkaure do not fall in a perfect row. Menkaure is shifted a little to the side. In Bauval's mind, the connection was instant. The ground mirrored the sky. That spark of recognition would later grow into a published idea, and eventually a global phenomenon once it landed in books and documentaries. By the late 1980s, Bauval was already writing about it, and in 1994 he released The Orion Mystery with Adrian Gilbert. Hancock soon joined the conversation, amplifying it to a worldwide audience with Fingerprints of the Gods in 1995, and later Magicians of the Gods in 2015. Through their combined efforts, the Orion correlation became one of the most discussed alternative history claims about ancient Egypt. And the appeal was obvious. If the pyramids mapped the stars, and if the Sphinx tied into the constellation of Leo looking due east at dawn, then maybe these monuments were more than royal tombs. Maybe they carried knowledge from a civilization far older than Egypt itself. Hancock's frame is larger than the pyramids alone. His narrative imagines a lost civilization during the Ice Age, around the time of the Younger Dryas period, roughly 12,000 years ago. In this view, a disaster, often described as a comet impact, followed by a sudden cold snap, wiped out a culture that had mastered advanced knowledge. Survivors supposedly spread around the world, passing on skills in architecture, astronomy, and engineering to later societies. The pyramids, in this telling, are not simply Egyptian achievements, but billboards of that ancient inheritance. It's a sweeping story of rise, fall, and survival, and it gives the Orion correlation its punch. Because if the monuments reflect the sky of 10,500 years BC, then they could be a message carved in stone from an age long forgotten. To keep things clear, let's lay out the specific claims often repeated in this debate, the points that Hancock, Bauval, and their supporters highlight most. The first is the design claim. According to the theory, the pyramids of Giza line up with Orion's belt exactly as it appeared around 10,500 years BC. The Sphinx, facing east, ties in with the constellation of Leo rising at dawn. The Nile itself is said to mirror the Milky Way running through the sky. Put together, this means the entire Giza landscape becomes a star map meant to freeze a particular moment in the heavens. That is the heart of the Orion correlation. The second is the tooling claim. If you walk through Giza, Saqqara, or other ancient sites, you see granite blocks with smooth cuts, drilled cores, and tight joints. In Hancock's books and lectures, he repeats the same point again and again. The ancient Egyptians of the Fourth Dynasty could not have achieved that level of precision using the copper chisels and dolerite pounders available to them. The suggestion is that some forgotten technology, machines or methods lost to time, must have been at work. The third is the age claim for the Sphinx. Geologist Robert Schoch, beginning in the early 1990s, argued that the erosion patterns on the walls of the Sphinx enclosure show heavy rainfall, not just wind and sand. Since Egypt's climate with heavy rains belongs to much earlier periods, Schoch and others suggest the Sphinx must be thousands of years older than the Fourth Dynasty, pushing it back to the Ice Age. Graham Hancock quickly ran with this idea, weaving it into his books and documentaries as support for his broader argument that both the Sphinx and the pyramids preserve the fingerprints of a lost civilization. The fourth is what might be called the paperwork claim. For monuments as massive as the pyramids, skeptics of the mainstream view often ask, where are the records? Where are the logistics, the receipts, the daily notes that show workers hauling stone, feeding crews, or managing supplies? In Hancock's framing, the absence of detailed Egyptian documents is a glaring hole, a silence that points to something missing in the official story. If there is no paperwork, maybe the builders were not who we think they were. And finally, there's a modern twist that keeps the mystery alive. In 2017, scientists using muon radiography announced a previously unknown void inside the Great Pyramid. In 2023, another paper revealed a hidden corridor near the north side. These discoveries, made by scanning with cosmic rays, showed that parts of the pyramid remain unexplored. For fans of lost civilization theories, the news was rocket fuel. If there are still sealed chambers and unexplained spaces inside, perhaps the monuments hide more than we ever imagined. So those are the headline claims: the star map, the tools, the Sphinx's age, and the missing records. They are bold and dramatic, but bold claims call for equally strong testing. The plan here is to lay down a clear test using evidence that anybody can check within 48 hours. No closed archives, no hidden PDFs, no trust me expert statements. Only published surveys, excavation reports, peer-reviewed scientific work, and official project papers. If it cannot be pulled up online or in a library within 2 days, it does not make the cut. The rocks don't lie, testing Hancock's pyramid claims. First up is the sky. The boldest claim says the pyramids of Giza are more than monuments. They're a frozen star map of Orion's belt from around 10,500 years BC. If that were true, the ground plan would have to match the heavens in a way that couldn't be a coincidence. So what does the stone actually say? When surveyors measured the sides of the Great Pyramids, they didn't find chaos or mystery. They found order. Each side points toward true north, with only tiny slips, just a few arc minutes. That's a fraction of a degree, smaller than the width of your little finger when you hold it up against the sky. Khufu's Great Pyramid misses north by roughly 4 to 6 arc minutes. Khafre's pyramid is in the same narrow window. Sneferu's Red Pyramid down at Dashur is off by about 9. These are not the fingerprints of an Ice Age blueprint. They are the signature of Old Kingdom surveyors who cared about precision and got it right. The pattern is consistent and human. Glenn Dash's resurvey pulled together older data from Petrie in the 1880s and J.H. Cole in the 1920s, and the result was the same every time. Careful alignments, all nudged slightly counterclockwise. Boring, maybe, but boring in the best way. It's exactly what you'd expect if Egyptian engineers had a repeatable method and stuck to it. So how did builders working 45 centuries ago lock those huge bases to the north? You don't need lasers or lost machines. You need patience, a plumb line, and a trick of the stars. Kate Spence's work showed how it could have been done. Take 2 bright stars, Kochab in the Little Dipper and Mizar in the Big Dipper. Watch as they circle the pole. When they line up vertically above the horizon, you drop a plumb line. That direction is true north. Because Earth's axis wobbles slowly over time, the small error you get shifts predictably by century. When you graph those shifts, they track almost perfectly with the way pyramid orientations drift during the 3rd millennium BC. The surveyors weren't chasing Orion across deep time. They were locking onto the living sky of their own age. That alone challenges the star map theory. But what about the big picture? The idea that the 3 pyramids mimic Orion's belt with Menkaure offset to the side. It looks neat on a poster. On the ground, the geometry doesn't hold. Astronomers Anthony Fair al. and E.C. Krupp compared the angles. The tilt of Orion's belt relative to the north in 10,500 BCE isn't the tilt carved into Giza. To make the match work, you have to flip or rotate the map until it looks right. At that point, you're not reading the pattern, you're editing it. The sky-to-ground comparison collapses under measurement. Verdict on the Orion correlation: fail. The pyramids are aligned with north in a way that fits Old Kingdom surveying. They do not encode a sky from the Ice Age. Now let's leave the sky and walk into the quarries. The second claim says the stonework, especially granite beams, polished faces, and neat circular drill holes, proves the use of high technology beyond copper chisels. But the rocks tell a different story. At the Penn Museum, researchers cast the insides of ancient drill holes and studied them under magnification. They found parallel ridges running around the core, tight, regular, and consistent. Then they rebuilt the tools, a copper tube, a bow, and wet quartz sand as the cutting abrasive. When they drilled through quartz and granite, the same concentric grooves appeared. The copper wasn't slicing the rock, the sand was. Copper served as the delivery system, soft enough to wear but tough enough to hold shape, while the grit did the work. If you've ever used sandpaper, you already know the principle. The experiments even gave a sense of speed. With a pump drill and copper tube, a team could bore through half an inch of quartz in about 3 hours. That's 10 times faster than using a cane tube with the same abrasive. It's not glamorous. The copper flares, it has to be re-annealed in a fire, your arms ache. But the results match the archaeological cores exactly. The so-called mystery disappears once you pick up the tools and put them to stone. And where did the stone come from? The trails are still there. The fine white casing limestone was cut at Tura, across the river from Giza. The granite was hewn at Aswan, nearly 600 miles upriver, where the quarry floors preserve thousands of dolerite pounders, black, heavy stones used to pound out shapes in granite. The Quarryscapes program documented battered quarry faces, extraction trenches, and even blocks abandoned mid-cut. These aren't signs of lost machines. They're the scars of hammers and the scatter of hand tools. Put the lab tests together with the quarries, and the picture is simple. Copper, stone, and sand can explain the tool marks. The supply chain is written in the rock. Verdict on impossible masonry: fail. That leaves the claim that there's no paperwork, no logistics, no receipts tying the pyramids to the reigns of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. This is where the silence is supposed to shout, that if you don't see written orders or harbor ledgers, maybe the whole dynastic story is wrong. But here, the receipts pile up. Start with dating. When builders mixed gypsum mortar, tiny flecks of charcoal slipped in. Those flecks preserve carbon, and carbon carries the radioactive isotope carbon-14. A large dating project led by Georges Bonani, Zahi Hawass, and Mark Lehner gathered hundreds of samples from Old and Middle Kingdom monuments. The calibrated ranges landed squarely in the 3rd millennium BCE. The ages matched the pharaoh's timeline. Later on, Michael D. and his team rechecked the radiocarbon results using updated statistical methods that smooth out the rough edges in the data. The big picture stayed the same. The dates point squarely to the time of Khufu and the other 4th dynasty kings. A few samples came out older, but that's easy to explain. Sometimes builders burned scraps of timber that had already been cut decades or even centuries earlier, so the wood was older than the mortar it ended up in. But taken as a whole, the tests locked the pyramids into the pharaoh's timeline. Now, picture trying to build the pyramids without a waterway nearby. In 2022, scientists studied pollen trapped in ancient mud around Giza to rebuild what the Nile looked like thousands of years ago. They discovered an old branch of the river, now called the Khufu branch, that once reached right up to the base of the plateau. During the very centuries the pyramids were rising, that channel was still deep enough for boats to sail in. Heavy blocks could be floated from the Tura quarries, unloaded almost at the foot of the site, and the barges could head straight back for another load. Today, that branch is long gone, buried under desert sand. But in pyramid times, the river itself delivered the stone. And if boats were docking at Giza, the workers needed somewhere to live. They had it. South of the Sphinx sits Hayt el Ghurab, often called the lost city of the pyramid builders. Archaeologists have been digging it for decades, and the place is huge, over 17 acres. Long galleries probably housed labor crews. Bakeries produced bread in industrial quantities. Storage rooms, streets, and administrative offices filled out the settlement. Seal impressions carry the names of real officials. Ash layers and food remains show what people were eating. This was not a myth or a legend. It was a planned city, built to organize, feed, and house the workforce that raised the pyramids. Then comes the most extraordinary receipt of all, a diary. In 2013, at Wadi al-Jarf on the Red Sea coast, archaeologists uncovered papyrus logbooks belonging to an official named Merer. His notes, written during Khufu's reign, record the daily routine of his crew as they ferried limestone. He describes loading blocks at Tura, sailing down the Nile, and delivering them to Akhet Khufu, the ancient name for the Great Pyramid. He mentions the dike of Roshi Khufu, a water control feature of the harbor, and even names Hancock, Khufu's half-brother, as the overseer in charge. He describes provisioning stops at Heliopolis and the rhythm of trips that lasted several days at a time. In just a handful of papyrus sheets, the entire supply chain comes to life. Quarry to boat, boat to harbor, harbor to pyramid. These aren't guesses or rumors. They are receipts written in ink by someone who was there. When you put all this evidence together, the no paper trail claim falls apart. Verdict on no receipts: fail. The receipts are right there. So the stones, the quarries, and the paperwork land squarely in the 4th dynasty. But what about the Sphinx and those new hidden spaces inside Khufu's pyramid? Do the Sphinx and hidden chambers prove Hancock right? The Sphinx claim starts with the way the statue looks today. The body and the walls around it are rounded and grooved. Some say that only heavy prehistoric rain could have carved those shapes, which would mean the Sphinx had to be thousands of years older than King Khafra, the 4th dynasty ruler usually linked to it. But the Sphinx is not a random block cut in deep time. It is carved directly from the natural stone of the Giza Plateau, and the geology ties it to Khafra's pyramid project. The plateau is made of limestone in stacked layers, almost like a layer cake. The head and neck of the Sphinx were carved from a tougher layer called Member 3, which resists erosion. The body and the enclosure walls cut through a softer layer called Member 2, which crumbles much faster. That is why the head still holds its shape while the body looks worn down. The difference is in the stone layers, not in the weather of 10,000 years ago. Archaeologist Mark Lehner mapped those stone layers block by block. He showed that the very ditch carved around the Sphinx also supplied blocks for the Sphinx Temple and for Khafra's Valley Temple right next door. The match is exact. The same quarry ditch that freed the statue's body provided the giant blocks for the temples. This is not the work of a forgotten Ice Age civilization. It is the work of Khafra's own builders, cutting, hauling, and building as part of one project. So why do the walls look so scalloped? In the 1990s, geologist K. Lalgari and his team studied the surface closely. They showed that in limestone, salt is a hidden enemy. Groundwater brings salts up into the stone. When the surface dries, the salts crystallize, and the crystals push grains apart from the inside. This process, called salt weathering, makes the softer layers peel and crumble, while harder bands remain firm. Add desert wind and daily swings of moisture, and you get rounded corners and vertical channels without needing ancient rainstorms. The building sequence on the plateau adds even more detail. Khafra's Great Stone Causeway, the wide road running from his pyramid down to the Valley Temple, was already in place before the Sphinx ditch was fully cut. The southern edge of the Sphinx quarry lines up perfectly with the northern edge of the causeway foundation. That means the Sphinx body was carved after the pyramid, and causeway were already underway. The blocks cut out for the Sphinx went directly into nearby temples. The statue fits squarely inside Khafra's building program. Later, history shows the Sphinx was cared for and repaired, but this does not change its origin. In the New Kingdom, around 1400 years BC, King Thutmose IV cleared sand away and placed a granite tablet between the paws, now known as the Dream Stela. The inscription tells how the Sphinx promised him the throne if he freed it from the dunes. Much later, in the early 20th century, French engineer Émile Barrès led a massive restoration project from the year 1925 to the year 1936. He cleared the forepaws, rebuilt retaining walls, patched a crack in the back that was about 6 feet across, and even sealed it with blocks, cement, and an iron hatch. Today, much of what you see on the Sphinx includes ancient stone, ancient repairs, and modern cement. You cannot treat every groove as untouched evidence of prehistoric rain. There is even more proof on the ground. When Lehner's team dug down to the bedrock in the Sphinx enclosure, they found pottery and settlement debris from the 4th dynasty in undisturbed pockets. That means Old Kingdom material was sitting right where you would expect it, around a monument belonging to Khafra's estate. Higher layers contained New Kingdom and Roman debris, which explains why the site looks mixed, but the bottom line is clear. The base of the statue belongs to Khafra's time. Now to the last claim, the hidden spaces inside Khufu's Great Pyramid. The story goes that newly discovered voids are machine rooms built by some lost civilization. The actual scans tell a more down-to-earth story. The technique is called muon radiography. Space constantly rains down tiny high-energy particles called muons. Solid rock absorbs some of them. Empty spaces let more of them pass through. By placing detectors inside known passages of the pyramid and measuring muons over months and years, scientists can spot where the rock thins out. That is how the Scan Pyramids project discovered 2 large voids. The first was announced in the year 2017. It is called the Big Void, and it sits above the Grand Gallery. Detectors from Japan and France all picked it up. The signal showed an empty space at least 98 feet long, with a cross-section similar in size to the Grand Gallery itself. The Grand Gallery is about 153 feet long and 28 feet tall, so you are talking about a space big enough to matter for the structure. The scans could not say if the void is straight, stepped, or divided, but they proved it is there. The second discovery came in the year 2023. muon counts from detectors in the descending passage, and a medieval tunnel showed a corridor right behind the chevron-shaped gabled stones at the pyramid's north face. The dimensions are precise, about 30 feet long, 6.5 feet wide, 7 feet tall, with its floor about 65 feet above the original ground level. The corridor sits just 2.8 feet behind the chevrons. Then, in 2025, a follow-up study used ground-penetrating radar, ultrasound, and electrical imaging to double-check the muon results. The outcome was the same. The corridor was right where the muon said it would be, with the same shape and size. 3 different tools, all with different principles, saw the same cavity. So what are these spaces for? The answer is, in the design logic of the pyramid. The chevrons are not decorations. They are giant gabled beams used to spread weight away from openings. You see the same trick above the king's chamber, where 5 stacked relieving chambers prevent the granite beams from cracking under the mountain of stone above them. The corridor behind the north chevrons works the same way. It is a stress relief space or a staging cavity. Its size, tall enough for a person to walk through, makes sense for construction crews who needed to place blocks and then leave it sealed. The big void above the grand gallery also fits this logic. The gallery is a long, steep passage with a corbelled roof, delicate under the load of hundreds of thousands of tons of stone. Leaving a huge airspace above it is one way to reduce stress and shift weight around. Builders already used that trick in the king's chamber. The void shows they may have done it again on a larger scale, and none of this is brand new. In the 1960s, Nobel Prize winner Luis Alvarez placed a muon detector in Khafra's pyramid. He did not find new chambers there, but he proved the method worked. The scans give us sizes and positions in feet and inches. They do not give us machines, fittings, or evidence of a different civilization. Put all the pieces together, and the verdict is plain. Yes, there is a big void above the grand gallery. Yes, there is a corridor about 30 feet long behind the north chevrons. No, they are not machine rooms. The pyramids spark mystery because of their scale, but their true story is not one of forgotten civilizations. It is one of ancient Egyptians who measured the stars, quarried limestone, floated blocks up the Nile, and left monuments and written records behind. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.